What's up, everybody? Garrett back here from Born to Be Rad, aka 1/3 of the Rad Pack, and this is our Rad 9 challenge, the 1994 challenge, where we're gonna rank our top 9 movies from 1994. Now again, this was not an easy list to make. I mean, 94 was a pretty big year when it came to movies, especially in my life with the age that I was at in 1994. I saw a lot of these movies in theaters. I also rented a lot of these movies a couple of years later. And then years after that, I saw even more movies from 94 that maybe I just didn't catch as a kid. Now, if you want to be part of this Rad Pack challenge, this 1994 challenge, feel free to post a video or response video to this. Just make sure to tag the Rad Pack pod in your description so we get notified and we can share it around. Feel free to tag me over on my social media at Born to Be Rad. You can tag Mel and Justin as well. They put 2 videos out already with their Rad 9. I have not watched theirs yet because I didn't want it to interrupt my Rad 9 and any of the decisions that I made here. So again, very, very hard. 1994, it's crazy to think that was 30 years ago. It's insane to me. Some of these movies do not feel that old. And doing this list, I actually found that some of these movies moved up in a prior 1990 ranking. So some of these have kind of jumped other ones, but it's going to be very interesting, to say the least, to talk about these 9 titles and tell you a little bit about them. All right, coming in at number 9 was going to be Ace Ventura. This is a fantastic comedy. This was my introduction to Jim Carrey in 1994. If you watched our Rad Pack podcast episode talking all things Jim Carrey, this thing still holds up. It kind of changed the game of comedies back in the day, but again, there's just so many cool movies that came out in this year. I had to put this at number 9. All right, number 8 is actually a movie that I didn't see too long ago, and I realized it came out in 94, and I absolutely love this thing. This is one that I don't think is going to be on many people's list. It's rarely ever talked about, and that is going to be The Getaway with Alec Baldwin, Kim Basinger. I'm a huge Kim Basinger guy, so I really was diving deep on a lot of her things lately, and I realized how much I do love The Getaway. I think this is a fantastic movie. It's like an action thriller movie. This is one that I think more people need to check out. It's highly entertaining. All right, number 7 is another action movie that I saw in theaters, and it was one of my favorite movies of all time. At that point, I had the VHS. I watched it constantly, and that was Speed, this action thriller Speed with Keanu Reeves, Sandra Bullock. This thing was a major success in the theaters. I can remember everybody talking about Speed back in the day, and man, I absolutely love this movie, and it's remained one of my favorite movies of the 90s. All right, number 6 on my list is going to the horror genre, and I didn't see this movie again until a little bit later after that. As I was really dipping my toes into the horror genre, I realized this had Sam Neill, who I was a big fan of from Jurassic Park, and that is In the Mouth of Madness, a John Carpenter movie that does not get enough love. I think it's starting to get a little bit more love now, but this is such a cool movie about an author who writes these horror novels, kind of like a Stephen King. His name is Sutter Kane. It's just a real cool movie. It almost feels dreamlike in a sense, but In the Mouth of Madness had to make this list. If you guys have not checked this movie out, I highly recommend it. All right, we are on our top 5. I'm going to talk about a movie that was a big movie in 94, especially for things like the soundtrack. As a kid of the 90s, this soundtrack was everything, which made me want to see this movie even more, and that is The Crow. The Crow, what a great movie from the 90s. This just feels so 90s, so gritty. And it's got a remake coming out soon, and I'm interested to check it out. I don't think it's going to be anything like the original, but again, The Crow was such a big movie in the 90s. I'm glad to at least seeing it still get a lot of love. All right, number 4 is an absolute classic. That is Shawshank Redemption. I'm sure this is probably on everybody's list, more or less. This is an absolute classic of a movie. Stephen King adaptation. This is such a fantastic movie. Everything about it, the acting, the storytelling. I absolutely love this. It's a glorified classic, and I'm sure, like I said, it's going to be on a lot of people's list. Another movie from 94, which is probably the biggest movie of 1994, and that is Forrest Gump. Another movie that is an absolute freaking classic, a banger with Tom Hanks. Such a real cool movie. Again, Forrest Gump is one that I think everybody's going to have on their list, more or less. Maybe not Mel, but most people will probably have this on their list. Man, I don't know what to say about this. If you haven't seen Forrest Gump, you need to see it now. All right, I'm on my number 2, and this, to be honest, is probably my favorite comedy of all time, at least one of them, and that is Dumb and Dumber. Again, this was Jim Carrey at his best in '94, putting out banger after banger after banger, and Dumb and Dumber came out and completely blew me away with how funny this was. And again, I could be a little biased here, but the Farrelly brothers are actually from my neighborhood, where I grew up, so very, very cool. This was such a huge thing for us where I live when this came out because, again, this was the big break for the Farrelly brothers. They went on to do other things like Something About Mary, another great one. But, man, Dumb and Dumber, having the Farrelly brothers, having Rhode Island represented, having Jim Carrey involved, this thing was and is an absolute classic when it comes to comedy. All right, last but not least, my number 1 movie of 1994. And man, this has grown into my number 1 movie of 94. This has grown into a favorite of mine through the years where I've always loved it. But I feel like the more and more I watch this, the more and more I love this. I've talked about this before. It's a horror movie and it is Brain Scan from 1994. This has got Edward Furlong in here. This is such a cool movie. It just feels so 90s. It brings me back to being a kid in 1994, a preteen in 94, the atmosphere of his room, the way that the town looks, I mean, the neighborhood. This is such a cool movie. And again, Trickster is one of those characters that I feel like is a lost icon in the world of horror. There's so much we could have done with this character. I wish this had a sequel. I wish this was a franchise. I wish we saw more of Trickster in the horror genre. Now, guys, that was my Rad 9 of 1994. A lot of these movies you'll probably see on a lot of lists. A lot of movies you will not see on a lot of lists. But my number 1 being Brain Scan, I doubt that's going to be something that's going to be number 1 on many people's list, if not anybody's list. But for me, these are my favorite 9 movies of 1994, and we love doing these Rad Pack Rad 9 challenges. So thank you to everybody who is involved, who is participating. And like I said, if you want to do it on Instagram, just make a list, stack some tapes, stack some movies, tag us. We will repost it. And the same thing on YouTube. Just throw us a tag at Born to Be Rad, My Killer Podcast, Dead Couch, Rad Pack Pod, and we will share these things around. Guys, this is Garrett at Born to Be Rad and 1/3 of the Rad Pack. And like always, stay